Moments of regret, moments of connection, moments of doubt, moments of truth, moments of rising tension, not as cutscenes, but as places that hold the emotional residue of what just happened. They serve as silent contemplative spaces, like the kingdom is offering Hornet a chance to breathe and process before she steps back into danger. Some players rush through them, thinking they are illusions or optional content, but those who take their time can sense the subtle messages Farloom is trying to send. These spaces aren't designed to be beaten, they're designed to be felt. Silksong's emotional arc isn't only told through characters or bosses, it unfolds in the land itself. And these echo zones are where the land whispers most directly. What these dream logic zones mean for Hornet's story. Silksong treats internal worlds and external worlds as reflections of each other. Farloom doesn't just challenge Hornet with enemies or puzzles. It challenges her with herself. By making the kingdom respond to emotions, hers and others, it gradually brings Hornet into a deeper understanding of her own identity. The echoes do not exist to reveal lore. They exist to reveal truth. Hornet enters Farloom as someone forged in someone else's war. In these zones, the walls crack enough for her to see the echoes of what she has been carrying. Grief in the shadows, hope in a flicker of light, rage in the shape of a memory creature that charges without thought. Farloom isn't judging her, it's acknowledging her. The kingdom dreams around her not to confuse her, but to meet her halfway. When you put all these threads together, you see the real purpose of the echo zones. They show that Farloom is not just a place Hornet explores. It is a place that explores her, responding to her story the same way she responds to its danger, its beauty, and its sorrow. Most kingdoms show you everything they have if you're willing to explore long enough. Farloom, however, holds back, not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. Some parts of this world don't appear because you searched well. They appear because you happen to pass through at the exact moment the kingdom felt like revealing itself. These moments aren't marked. They don't warn you. Sometimes they last seconds. Sometimes they linger only as long as your curiosity does. And once they're gone, they're gone. Farloom doesn't reward completionism. It rewards presence. Hornet is a fast traveler, by nature and by necessity. But Silksong teaches you something quietly. You miss things when you move too quickly. This isn't a world built to be checked off. It's a world built to be noticed. And the rarest parts of Farloom are the ones that don't repeat. Moments that appear once, then fade like breath on glass. There are places in Farloom you can enter only a single time. Not because the game locks them, but because the world changes after you pass through. A collapsing tunnel might seal behind you forever. A vine might retract and die. A fungal bridge might sag and disintegrate after bearing your weight only once. The first time it happens, it doesn't feel scripted. It feels accidental, as if the world simply got tired of holding itself together. You try to return later, expecting to find the same path, but the room is different. Maybe submerged in water now, maybe swallowed by moss, maybe entirely missing, as if the kingdom exhaled and erased that small corner of itself. This gives Farloom a strange sense of memory. The world remembers Hornet's passage, and in remembering, it reshapes. Players who rush through the game never realize how many of these shifting places exist. They're not puzzles, they're moments, and that's what makes them so compelling. Farloom behaves like a living thing, adjusting after each touch. Tools you find only if you're paying attention. Some of the most interesting tools in Silksong, the ones that feel experimental or unpolished, are hidden in places the game doesn't expect anyone to find on their first playthrough. Not because they're locked behind difficulty, but because they're hidden behind curiosity. One tool in particular, a strange little contraption that looks like it was built from scavenged parts, is found in a room that only opens after a minor enemy accidentally breaks the wall during a struggle. If you kill that enemy too quickly, the wall never cracks. If you flee too far, it never notices you long enough to strike the right spot. If you don't revisit the area at the right time, the break seals itself again. The tool isn't essential for progress. It isn't even particularly powerful, but its existence tells you something loud and clear. Farloom rewards those who linger. Another tool appears in a chamber connected to a resonance shrine. You only gain access to it if you trigger a sequence of tones in the order the environment suggests, not through trial and error, but through listening. The tool itself feels almost ceremonial, something crafted to honor the shrine's ancient purpose, but Hornet can wield it with notable flair. It's fast, sharp, and elegant, but fragile, as if it was never meant for battle. The kingdom gives it to you only if you pay attention to its feelings. Traps that aren't punishments, but warnings. Farloom's traps don't always behave like traps. Some are misdirections, some are warnings, and a few feel like the kingdom's way of saying, "Are you sure you should be here right now?" There are platforms that look completely safe but dip under Hornet's weight. Not enough to drop her, just enough to make her hesitate. That tiny pause is often the difference between falling into an ambush or noticing an alternate path before walking into danger. There are vines that suddenly twitch when you pass, not to attack, but to catch your attention. Sometimes a predator reacts to that twitch. Sometimes it doesn't. Either way, the vine wasn't trying to hurt you. It was alerting you. Even pressure plates behave oddly. One early area has a plate that activates only when Hornet's thread hums from recent combat. Step on it after a fight, and a wall retracts. Step on it while calm, and nothing happens. The trap isn't judging you. It's responding to the emotional atmosphere you carry into the room. None of this is explicit. Silksong never announces, "This world reacts to your state." But after a few hours, you begin to sense it. Farloom feels more like a partner in a dance than a hostile labyrinth. Creatures that only appear when the world is tired. A surprising number of enemies in Silksong don't spawn based on location. They spawn based on stress. Stress in Farloom isn't something you measure with a meter. It's something you activate. After long fights, after extended traversal, after ignoring rest points, after startling too many creatures, after triggering environmental tension. When the kingdom is tired, certain creatures emerge. They move slowly, like they've grown weary from the ambient stress of the region. They aren't dangerous unless you push them, but they're unsettling. These quiet, lumbering creatures that wander in when the world feels strained. One such creature emits soft whines when Hornet gets too close, as if it is pleading for space rather than defending territory. Another curls up when attacked, becoming a shield for smaller creatures who gather beneath it. A third shakes dust from its body as it moves, creating a kind of hallway of falling debris that reveals hidden platforms or alcoves. These beings feel like the kingdom's self-defense mechanisms waking slowly, groggily, because Farloom itself is tired of being stressed. They're not bosses. They're not threats. They're signals. Performers who react to how you enter the room. Silksong has several NPCs and enemies who behave like performers on a stage. But the most interesting thing about them is how sensitive they are to Hornet's entrances. If she rushes in mid-dash, weapons drawn, some performers respond with showmanship. dramatic bows, exaggerated flourishes, timed attacks that resemble choreography. If she enters quietly, they adopt slower rhythms, watching her like dancers waiting for the right cue. If she arrives after fighting in the previous room, their movements shift again, reacting to the mood she carries with her. One performer only begins his act if Hornet pauses at the threshold for a moment, almost like waiting for her to take a seat in a phantom audience. Their battles don't feel like fights. They feel like rituals Hornet is interrupting or joining, depending on how you see it. The rarest versions of their performances appear only if the emotional state of the region aligns perfectly with Hornet's timing. You can miss these moments forever without knowing they existed. Rooms that rewrite themselves. After you leave, some rooms in Farloom shift, depending on what happens in adjacent zones. If Hornet triggers a collapse nearby, an untouched room might suddenly become half buried. If she defeats a large predator, a smaller species may take over the next area and litter it with new structures. Occasionally, a room will appear completely normal on the first visit, but return later and find that vines have grown, stones have shifted, and a narrow ledge you used before has disappeared entirely. The game doesn't telegraph this. It simply reshapes while you're gone. This gives every revisit weight. Nothing is guaranteed to be the way you left it. In some cases, a rare enemy appears only in these transformed rooms. Other times, a secret platform becomes reachable only because something collapsed earlier, creating debris. Farloom creates opportunities and removes them with the same quiet confidence. It behaves like something alive enough to forget its previous shape. Why Farloom's rare events matter more than its large ones. The big moments, boss fights, major NPC arcs, region reveals, are important, of course, but the soul of Silksong lives in its small moments. The tiny tremors in the environment, the fleeting interactions, the rooms that vanish if you blink, the tools you can miss because you didn't stand still long enough, the creatures that appear only when the world is nervous. These details are not meant to be collected. They're meant to be experienced. Farloom isn't a kingdom that demands mastery. It demands attention. It rewards those who move with intention, who breathe with the world instead of sprinting through it. And Hornet, a creature born of tension and survival, learns something essential through these rare events. She learns that a kingdom isn't defined by its rulers or its monsters, but by the moments that happen quietly on the sidelines, when no one thinks to look. Farloom has 1,000 secrets, but its rarest ones don't scream for discovery. They whisper, they flicker, they fade. They are moments you feel more than you find. They're reminders that this world, like Hornet herself, is alive in ways that cannot be mapped. There comes a point in Silksong when the kingdom you've been exploring no longer behaves like the kingdom you thought you understood. Farloom is strange from the beginning, alive in a way most lands aren't, responsive in ways that feel almost personal. But in Act 3, the world slips. It begins to lose coherence, like a fabric unraveling from a single bad stitch. The change doesn't announce itself. It creeps in slowly, the way rot spreads through fruit. Quietly at first, then all at once. You feel it before you see it. The rhythm of movement changes. Lights flicker in patterns that don't match the music anymore. Places that once felt stable now feel like they're trembling under their own weight. And Hornet, who has always danced through Farloom with confidence, finds that the kingdom begins shaking beneath her steps. This is Act 3, the moment when Farloom begins breaking its own rules. The first signs. Something is wrong. It usually starts with small things, almost too subtle to name. A platform sags under Hornet's weight a little longer than it should. A corridor that used to echo her footsteps now swallows sound entirely. Enemies behave just a hair off beat, as though distracted by something just out of sight. Then the world grows unusually quiet. Not peaceful quiet, but the kind of silence that follows a held breath. Farloom feels like it's thinking too hard. In earlier acts, the world watched Hornet. It reacted to her. In Act 3, the sense reverses. Now Hornet watches the world, trying to figure out what it's reacting to. She's no longer the disruptor. Something else is. The rot. That isn't just decay. When people hear corruption, they imagine something like infection, a substance, a plague, a spread. Farloom's corruption is stranger. It isn't spreading from one source. It's emerging from within, almost as if the kingdom is tired of holding itself together. Vines that were once vibrant begin to wilt in slow loops, curling into shapes that look like clenched fists. Fungal growths that emitted soft light now flicker like dying hearths. Even the air thickens, as if the kingdom is exhaling something heavy that it's been holding in for too long. At first, you assume it's aesthetic, maybe just mood setting. Then you walk back through an earlier biome and realize the layout is different. Not slightly different, fundamentally changed. Platforms collapse where they once stood firm. Enemies migrate to places they never touched before. Hidden routes you relied on are suddenly sealed off. Others open in their place, jagged and unstable. The corruption isn't invading Farloom. Farloom is rewriting itself. When the environment starts fighting, there is a moment, every player feels it, when they realize Farloom is no longer a playground, a puzzle, or even a test. It's a wounded animal, and wounded animals lash out. Vines grab at Hornet's feet, almost subconsciously. Wall spores burst prematurely, triggered by tremors rather than movement. Water levels in certain biomes rise and fall unpredictably, as if the environment is having trouble regulating itself. Even platforms show signs of distress. Some sag too deeply before springing back. Others creak, groan, and then crack. The kingdom doesn't want to drop her. It's not punishing her. It just can't hold itself up anymore. Farloom is collapsing in slow motion. And as always, collapse reveals truth. The shifting physics of an unraveling world. This is where Silksong becomes truly uncanny. Jumps feel different in Act 3, not mechanically, but emotionally. There's a moment when Hornet leaps from a ledge, and you expect her arc to carry her cleanly to the next platform. Instead, she drifts downward just a little earlier than expected. At first, you think you misjudged the distance. Then it happens again, and again. The world is losing consistency. Surfaces stretch minutely, like elastic pulled too thin. Air pressure changes in tunnels, subtly affecting how Hornet falls. In some caves, vibrations throw her balance off just enough to interfere with wall jumps. Nothing is random. Everything feels tired. You begin to understand something important. Farloom isn't dying. It's resisting the shape it was forced into. The kingdom is rejecting its own geometry, refusing to uphold the structure of a place built on strict hierarchy and cruel expectations. The world isn't breaking because of corruption. It's breaking because it's finally refusing to endure. Creatures who sense the end. Before you do, the wildlife understands what's coming far earlier than Hornet does. Even the most mindless creatures behave differently. Some predators grow agitated, pacing the same stretch repeatedly, like animals sensing an earthquake. Others retreat into nests or crevices where they were never seen before. Harmless bugs vanish entirely as if the world has recalled them, pulling them away from danger. The most heartbreaking behavior comes from creatures Hornet has grown familiar with. Cragler parents shielding their young, not from her, but from the kingdom itself. They huddle close, shifting their bodies defensively, even when no threat is present. If you watch carefully, you'll see small creatures gathering in the corners of rooms, clustering beneath roots or debris. They aren't plotting. They aren't seeking food. They're hiding. The air hums differently in their presence. Farloom's ecosystem knows it's unraveling. Every tiny creature becomes a barometer of how unstable the world is becoming. Biomes that start reflecting Hornet's choices. By Act 3, Farloom's echo zones, those dreamlike emotion-shaped spaces, begin influencing the physical world too. Areas where Hornet showed mercy feel softer somehow. Colors lean warmer. Light lingers longer in corners where it once flickered anxiously. Even the music in those areas retains a hint of stability. But regions marked by cruel decisions or violent outcomes feel harsher. Shadows stretch unnaturally. Ground textures tighten into harder lines. Fungal particles drift more slowly, like thickened air. Whether Hornet realizes it or not, the world is mirroring her story. As she climbs toward resolution, the kingdom tries to climb with her, but it struggles under its own history. Rot is less a disease and more a symptom of insight. Farloom is waking up to what it became, a kingdom that demanded too much of itself, too much of its citizens, too much of its ideals. Understanding hurts, even for a kingdom. The approaching quiet, a world holding its breath. Late into Act 3, players begin noticing long stretches with no enemies at all. Empty hallways, silent towers, rooms that once housed dangerous beasts, but now hold nothing except drifting dust. This is the final sign. Farloom isn't preparing for a final battle. It's preparing for a confession. The world is pulling back, drawing inward, curling into itself. Everything feels like the moment right before saying something difficult, something painful, something true. Even Hornet's footsteps feel louder in this silence. After everything the kingdom threw at her, predators, traps, puzzles, politics, its final act is not violence. It's vulnerability. Farloom's collapse is not its defeat. It's its unmasking. What the collapse means for Hornet has spent her whole life in kingdoms shaped by tragedy. Hallowness spiral into infection was slow and suffocating. Farloom's unraveling is different. It's a release. The corruption in Act 3 is not trying to consume her. It's trying to free her, or at least show her what built her, what shaped her, what she must rise beyond. The kingdom's breaking point becomes Hornet's turning point. As Farloom loses coherence, Hornet finds hers. Her movement sharpens in contrast to the world's instability. Her decisions carry more weight. Her relationships, her confrontations, and her emerging identity all crystallize against this backdrop of unraveling order. Farloom shows her something no other kingdom has. Strength without compassion collapses. Order without empathy suffocates. Sacrifice without purpose rots into ruin. In other words, Farloom is what happens when a kingdom tries too hard to perfect itself and breaks beneath the weight. Hornet, standing in that collapse, understands that her role is not to restore Farloom's old shape, but to help shape its new one, or leave it behind if it cannot be saved. Act 3 is not just the world falling apart, it's the world telling Hornet, choose who you'll be when the old rules no longer make sense. When Farloom finally cracks, in the final hours, the world's instability intensifies. Light flickers unpredictably. Echo zones bleed into real ones. Physics bend just slightly enough to be unsettling. Certain rooms feel as if space has folded, collapsing two moments on top of each other. It feels like the kingdom is fighting with itself, not out of malice, but out of fear. Hornet is walking through a world that is trying desperately not to break but no longer remembers how to hold together. And this is where Silksong becomes something rare, a game where the land feels wounded in a deeply emotional way. The collapse isn't spectacle, it isn't chaos, it's sadness. A kingdom undoing itself because it cannot bear its own history any longer. Hornet doesn't fix Farloom. She witnesses it. She stands in its truth. She carries what she learns out of the collapse. And that, more than anything, is what makes Actor 3 unforgettable. The atmosphere of the end. What remains after Farloom falls silent. There is a particular kind of quiet that can settle over a place after it's given. Everything it has. Not the quiet of peace, or of rest, or even of death. It's the quiet of a truth finally spoken. A truth that was too heavy to carry for too long. Farloom reaches that quiet near the end of Hornet's journey, and it changes the feeling of the entire kingdom. The air grows still, not empty, but thoughtful, like a breath held between sentences that haven't yet been spoken. Even without dialogue, the world feels like it's trying to say something important. Not with words, but with what it allows Hornet to walk through in these final hours. In the last regions of the kingdom, the corruption stops looking like an enemy and starts looking like exhaustion. Walls dim instead of pulse. Fungal lights flicker softly instead of spasming. You don't feel like you're trespassing anymore. You feel like you're walking through a place that has finally stopped pretending to be strong. Farloom isn't collapsing now. It's confessing. And in that confession, Hornet becomes something different than she was when she first arrived. She isn't the prisoner carried here against her will, nor the lone hunter fighting through ruins and rituals. She isn't the child of Hallownest anymore, or the weapon shaped by someone else's war. By the time she reaches this final stretch, she's become the one steady thing in a kingdom losing itself. For the first time, the world feels like it is looking to her for direction, not to test her, not to challenge her, but simply because she is the last one who still remembers how to move forward. You can feel it in the way the echoes behave. They no longer flicker randomly. They follow her, not out of fear or confusion, but with a kind of expectancy, as if the world is waiting for her to decide what the next chapter will look like. Even the ambient creatures seem to understand that the story is reaching an ending. Predators no longer leap from shadows as quickly. Harmless bugs sit still, watching. These moods change based on Hornet's recent kills, boss progression, corruption levels, items held, the last bench used, time since entering the zone, number of enemies startled. Ambient sound moods include calm, reduced enemy aggression, ambient fauna visible, slow-moving platforms. Disturbed enemies wander off routes, more frequent flyers, rising vibrations in walls. Tense particle effects shift, music harmonies tighten, ground enemies shorten telegraphs. Predatory ambush creatures emerge. Burrowers track vibration patterns, flyers coordinate. Corrupted spore density increases, movement platforms fail, healing slowed in certain zones, escape sequences more likely. These moods are never announced. You must feel them. It is world building used not as law, but as a form of ambient communication. Creatures respond to emotions, not just proximity. One of the most haunting systems is the emotional influence mechanic. Some creatures react to Hornet's state, not her presence. Examples: low health, increased predator aggression, foes enter finish mode, shortening intervals and narrowing patterns. High thread, increased dancer behavior, Acrobatic enemies copy Hornet's motion style. Long periods without combat. Curiosity state. Certain mobs follow or circle Hornet cautiously. Rapid kills. Chroma. Panic state. Weak foes scatter. Scavengers retreat. Apex predators awaken. High verticality. Aerial sync winged enemies adopt mirror flight patterns, ascending and descending with Hornet's jumps. The result is one of the most emotionally intelligent AI systems ever conceptualized in a platformer. Farloom feels alive because it reacts emotionally to everything Hornet does. The symphony of movement, environmental mechanics you don't realize exist. Some microsystems affect traversal subtly but continuously. Dust loops. Floating dust flickers in patterns that reveal upcoming ambushes. Wind thread interactions. Hornet's silk vibrates in draft-heavy areas, revealing hidden passage winds or alerting certain enemies. Shimmer walls. Surfaces that pulse faintly if they are secretly destructible. Ambient insects. Non-hostile creatures scatter or freeze based on how dangerous an unseen enemy ahead is. Platform tension. Some platforms visually tense up before snapping or retracting. Nothing needs a pop-up. Nothing needs a glowing outline. The world's language is visual, subtle, and consistent. Predator-prey microsystems. Another detail from your document that expands beautifully. Larger predators affect nearby enemy behavior. For example, when a hunt claw enters the screen, scavengers flee. When cogfly swarms gather, smaller bugs hide. When a spore beast inflates, fungus retreats. When a giltwater eel surfaces, flying mobs shift course. Combat isn't isolated. It is nested within the natural food chain. Hornet is not ignored by the world, but she is not the axis it spins on either. She is a disruption, a catalyst, a new apex threat that Farloom must continuously recalculate. Why these microsystems matter Silksong isn't content with being a sequel. It is a world that surpasses hollowness through systems of observation, analysis, emotional response, environmental adaptation. Everything moves for a reason. Everything reacts with purpose. Everything has a place in the ecosystem. Farloom is not a kingdom of monuments. It is a kingdom of behavior. The real story is not told through dialogue or boss arenas. It is told through the way creatures shift when you enter, how backgrounds pulse with tension, how the smallest insect reveals the deepest truth. Silksong is a world that responds to you, and in doing so, it teaches you how to respond to it. When you understand that rhythm, when your blade, your thread, your steps match the emotional logic of Farloom, you stop playing a game. You start participating in a living ecosystem, one that is watching, one that is learning, one that is evolving with you. Farloom is a kingdom full of rules that nobody bothered to write down. You understand them only by walking through them, bumping into them, and slowly realizing that the choices you make ripple outward in ways you don't always see right away. Hornet's arrival in this place sparks a very different kind of conflict, because the kingdom doesn't just give her enemies, it gives her people. People with expectations, with wounds, with philosophies that clash against hers like steel on silk. 3 stories form the emotional backbone of Farloom. Her involvement with Runt and the Huntress, the quiet tragedy of Shrine Guardian Seth, and the heavy sorrow carried by the old penitent. None of these threads exist just to decorate the plot. They define the kind of person Hornet becomes. Let's start with the most complicated of them. The Huntress, the Runt, and the kingdom's harshest lesson. Runt is such a small creature that anyone else might have stepped on him without noticing. He follows Hornet with a kind of naive devotion. the way a little sibling might shadow an older one. He's harmless, kind-hearted, and too soft for the world he's stuck in. Hornet never asked for a companion, but having him trail behind her fills the quiet of her journey with something tender, something she didn't realize she had room for. Then comes the huntress. If Hornet is a blade sharpened by survival, the huntress is a blade sharpened by belief. She sees Farloom through a predator's logic. Creatures survive because they prove themselves worthy. Those who don't meet the standard are, in her eyes, obstacles. Runt, unfortunately for him, is the very definition of unworthy in the huntress's worldview. She tells Hornet this plainly, that the kingdom is better off without the weak, that Hornet is interfering with nature simply by letting Runt live another day. What Hornet sees as kindness, the huntress sees as disruption. What Hornet calls protection, the huntress calls error. And so the player is pushed into a choice that doesn't announce itself as a choice. You either keep Runt close, shielding him, guiding him, allowing him to grow into someone braver, or you let him fade into the background, watching him shrink emotionally until he eventually disappears from the journey entirely. If Hornet protects him, Runt blossoms in small, touching ways. He becomes helpful in the only ways he can be. He warns her when danger is near. He finds little trinkets. He points out paths. He matures in his own fragile way into something closer to a friend. But protecting him enrages the huntress. She sees Hornet's mercy as a betrayal of the kingdom itself. Their final confrontation becomes deeply personal. It's not about death or dominance. It's about two philosophies colliding. Hornet's growing empathy against the huntress's unwavering belief in strength. When they clash, it feels inevitable, tragic, and strangely respectful. Two warriors who understand each other perfectly, even as they fight to prove the other wrong. If Hornet abandons Runt, however, the kingdom treats that decision differently. Runt doesn't die on screen. He simply stops appearing, stops helping, stops hoping. When he's finally gone, there is a small token left behind, something he chose to give Hornet, even when it became clear she'd never look for him. And the huntress, seeing Hornet turn away from sentiment, regards her not with rage but with acknowledgement. They become mirror images, two predators who understand that survival is its own kind of morality. Neither path is labeled as good or bad. They are simply consequences, echoing out into the world she walks through. Shrine Guardian. Seth and the weight of devotion. Seth is Farloom's gentlest contradiction. A guardian who doesn't want to fight. A devoted servant who carries an unspoken grief wherever he goes. His shrine is not a monument to victory, but a memorial to something the kingdom has long tried to forget. When Hornet meets him, Seth feels like a breath of calm that the game rarely allows. He bows respectfully, speaks softly, and treats her less like a threat and more like a pilgrim who's lost her way. His guidance is never forced. He offers wisdom like someone offering water, freely and sincerely. The shrine he protects is supposed to be a place of comfort, yet every detail carries a shadow. The candles, the soft carvings, the polished stones, they all feel like attempts to honor someone who isn't coming back. Rumors among Farloom's older bugs say that the shrine once drew travelers seeking ascension and transformation. Those who entered with hope didn't return at all. Seth knows this, and it weighs on him. If Hornet respects the shrine, performs the small rituals Seth asks of her, and treats the place with reverence, Seth's story becomes a quiet, luminous thread woven through the rest of the game. He rewards her, not with power, but with clarity. His presence becomes a grounding force, something peaceful in a kingdom built on tension. When his story reaches its end, he bows deeply, offering respect not just to Hornet's strength, but to her restraint. It's one of the gentlest moments Silksong allows. But if Hornet ignores him, disrupts the shrine, or intrudes where she's asked not to go, Seth's heart breaks in slow motion. He begs her to stop, not because he fears her, but because he fears what the shrine's secrets will do to her. When the conflict escalates, Seth fights only because she gives him no choice. His attacks feel like pleas, every motion a question. Why must this happen? Defeating him changes the tone of Falun. The lights dim, the bells fall silent. The shrine becomes a hollow place, a wound, not a sanctuary. And Seth's absence stays with the player long after leaving that corner of the map. The old penitent and the sorrow of survival. The old penitent feels like a ghost even though he's still alive. Every part of him, his posture, his voice, his half-remembered stories, carries the sense of someone who has watched far too much. He drifts through Falun like a living apology, whispering fragments of a past he can't escape. He embodies regret in a kingdom that pretends not to have any. The penitent once believed in Falun's strict philosophy of strength. He served the kingdom in ways he no longer wants to remember. The choices he made under its rigid hierarchy haunt him now, cracking his voice and weighing down his movements. In his eyes, strength became cruelty, and cruelty became tradition. He followed that tradition until it consumed everything good inside him. Hornet's presence affects him profoundly. She reminds him of everything he failed to protect. If she listens to him, really listens, his story transforms. He slowly opens up, shedding the armor of silence he built around himself. He finds relief in confession, and his final scene becomes a release rather than a collapse. He thanks her quietly for giving him the one thing Falun never allowed: understanding. If she turns away, treating him the way the kingdom treated him all his life, the penitent fades gently into despair, not dramatically, not violently, just emptier, more forgotten. Another casualty of a philosophy that worships strength so hard it crushes the weak beneath its feet. The game never scolds the player for that choice. It simply reflects the result back at them. The shape of the endings. Silksong's endings aren't binary. The world changes subtly based on what Hornet has done and whom she has helped, or failed. Runt's presence or absence affects how certain regions feel. Seth's shrine glows either with renewed life or remains dim forever. The old penitent's influence echoes in the kingdom's emotional tone. Even small conversations linger as shadows or lights in the late-game atmosphere. Some endings soften the world, making Falun feel like a place ready to heal. Others sharpen it, turning the kingdom into a harsher, more orderly environment that mirrors the huntress's philosophy. And a rare middle path blends the two, acknowledging Falun's cruelty while still planting the seeds for something better. No ending feels wrong. They feel honest, earned, reflective. Hornet's choices shape her identity far more intimately than they shape the knight's in Hallownest. She is not a vessel acting out a tragedy. She is a living being trying to navigate a kingdom determined to test her compassion, her patience, and her beliefs. Falun isn't interested in destiny. It's interested in who you become while enduring it. Some worlds hide their secrets behind locked doors or deep caverns. Falun hides them in places that don't quite follow the rules of time or space. These aren't dreams the way Hallownest approached dreams, where you stepped into someone's mind like entering a room. Falun's dream logic zones feel different. They feel like you've wandered into the part of the world where memory and instinct blur together, where the land remembers things that no one ever told it to remember. Hornet doesn't stumble into these places so much as she slips into them. One moment she's following a narrow path, and the next, the air changes. The walls distort. Light flickers strangely, and before she can fully process it, she realizes she's stepped into a piece of Farlum's inner world, a place that doesn't care about physics or direction, only emotion. These zones act less like dream worlds and more like memory echoes. They pull from the kingdom's past in a way that feels almost subconscious, as if Farlum itself is thinking out loud, and Hornet has wandered into the middle of a private thought. They're quiet, but not the comforting quiet of shrine halls or bellhearts' resting corners. This is the kind of quiet that feels alert, like the world is waiting for you to notice something important. And the more time you spend in these mind places, the more you realize the kingdom is trying to tell its story, even if it doesn't quite know how to put its feelings into words. How a kingdom dreams. Without sleeping, Farlum's echo zones don't introduce themselves. There's no ritual, no glowing doorway, no fanfare. Instead, they simply happen. You sense a subtle shift. The music thins out, colors soften or darken, and the ground feels slightly less solid beneath Hornet's feet. The longer you watch the environment, the more you notice that nothing behaves normally. Droplets pause mid-fall. Dust hangs in the air like it's too tired to settle. Shadows flicker in patterns that don't match any light source. It feels not like a hallucination, but like the world is looking inward. These are not memories of specific events. They're memories of sensations, fear, anticipation, regret, hope. Echoes of the emotional life of Farlum. Hallownest, preserved memories of people. Farlum preserves memories of feelings. And feelings, unlike broken masks or decaying buildings, do not fade cleanly. Hornet steps into these feelings as if stepping into a pool. They rise around her, cling to her, shape her movements. Some players describe these areas as dreams the world is having about itself, and that isn't far off. Creatures that live in memory, instead of flesh. What makes these places unsettling isn't just the atmosphere, it's the creatures that inhabit them. These beings don't move like physical animals. They drift, flicker, or pulse in ways that don't obey animation rules. They're made of light, shadow, or something in between. The best way to describe them is to imagine behavior first and anatomy second. Hornet doesn't fight them so much as she interrupts them, the way one might wave a hand through smoke. When she strikes them, they scatter into particles that reform only if the memory that created them still lingers. Most of these creatures don't even acknowledge her. They pace or flutter in loops, their patterns drawn from emotions rather than logic. A creature might pace back and forth endlessly, not because it guards territory, but because it is stuck in the rhythm of someone's long-forgotten anxiety. Another might circle around Hornet, not out of curiosity, but because it echoes an emotion that once orbited the kingdom itself. Fear circling hope, perhaps, or longing circling loss. These are not enemies, they're echoes. They don't harm Hornet in the traditional sense, but they do create an emotional weight. It's hard not to feel the tug of melancholy when surrounded by remnants of feelings without owners. Farlum doesn't dream of people. It dreams of the emotions they left behind. Biomes that remember more than they hold. Every dreamlike zone corresponds to a physical area in Farlum, but the connection is emotional, not geographical. A mossy forest might have an echo zone where the moss pulses like breath. A ruined tower might cast a memory shadow where all its broken architecture reappears intact, but only for a moment at a time. Waterlogged regions might have echoes where the water runs upward instead of down, following the path of someone's rising dread or anticipation. These echo landscapes operate by feeling. They reshape themselves according to the dominant emotion they are conjuring. In one such place, players see platforms appear only when Hornet commits to moving forward, as if the memory rewards intent. In another, pitfalls appear where regret is strongest, and disappear when she moves boldly. In another zone, light seems to flee when she hesitates, leaving her surrounded by muddy shadows that resemble old worries pooling at her feet. These spaces function more like emotional puzzles than physical challenges. Hornet must match the rhythm of the memory to move through it. Rush too much, and the world closes. Slow down too much, and the world dims. Only by understanding the emotional pacing does she cross safely. It's as if Farloom is telling her, "Learn my feelings, not my rules." Hornet's own mind leaves footprints. Here, this is where Silksong becomes quietly brilliant. Farloom doesn't only show its own memories, it reacts to Hornet's. As she progresses through the narrative, these echo zones shift subtly to reflect what she carries. After major confrontations, the dreamscapes become more brittle. After moments of compassion, the light lingers longer. If Hornet has made hard choices, abandoning Runt, upsetting Seth's shrine, the echo zones take on tones that feel slightly colder, not in punishment, but in reflection. It's like the world is a mirror dipped into water. The reflection changes depending on what Hornet brings with her. Sometimes the echo zones show her memories she doesn't fully understand. A silhouette that resembles Hallownest, but twisted by Farloom's logic. A flash of red thread. The faint outline of someone standing in a pose that feels strangely familiar. Nothing concrete enough to call a vision, but detailed enough to leave a mark. These aren't illusions. They're memories Farloom has picked up from Hornet herself, replaying them in its own fragmented way, like a child imitating a story it heard, but didn't fully grasp. Echo creatures tied to personal threads. Throughout these spaces, Hornet encounters beings that behave differently from the ambient memory creatures. These particular entities seem to be tied directly to specific emotional beats in her journey. For example, after a painful parting, a cluster of small flickering lights might follow her briefly, their movements echoing the pattern of someone who once walked behind her. When she pauses, they pause. When she leaps, they flutter upward like a breath, catching in her throat. They dissolve slowly when she re-enters the physical world, as if the memory is reluctant to let go. Other times, creatures shaped like sorrow or anger appear, almost like emotional storms made visible. They don't attack. They spiral, drift, or twist in looping arcs that force Hornet to move with care. Navigating them feels like walking through someone's quietly grieving thoughts made physical. These creatures are not just part of the zone. They are part of the story. Farloom remembers everything, even what Hornet tries not to remember. Echo zones as emotional checkpoints. Something fascinating happens when the player notices how these zones appear at turning points in the narrative. They often show up after Forge Daughter teaches endurance, Bellow teaches passion, Mask Maker teaches identity. Together they form the four pillars Hornet stands upon. 1. Skill. A blade is useless if the hand trembles. 2. Resilience. The fire must consume fear, not the wielder. 3. Ambition. A dream is a spark that shapes worlds. 4. Selfhood. Only those who know themselves can change a kingdom. These NPCs do not merely upgrade tools, they upgrade Hornet. Each encounter reinforces the central message. Farloom is not conquered by power. It is conquered by understanding. How each artisan reflects Hornet's inner arc Silksong is the story of a character forged in trauma, learning to rise beyond it. Each artisan symbolizes one stage of her evolution. Neolin, acceptance of purpose. Hornet stops running from what she must become. She chooses direction. She chooses intent. Forged daughter, acceptance of burden. She learns that strength requires maintenance, that fire needs tending, that her journey must be sustained. Bellow, acceptance of potential. Not all growth is graceful. Some of it is chaotic, messy, and experimental. Hornet must allow herself to try, fail, and rise again. Mask maker, acceptance of identity. She confronts the truth. She is not her lineage, her trauma, or her duty. She is who she decides to be. These aren't just upgrades. These are metamorphoses. When all four artisans converge. Late in the story, after enough upgrades, a moment arrives where all four artisans' philosophies collide. A tool forged in Neolin's precision, hardened by Forged Daughter, enhanced recklessly by Bellow, stabilized internally by the mask maker's work. This is the closest Hornet comes to wielding something truly hers. Not her mother's, not her kingdom's, not a relic of Hallownest, but Hornet's own creation, born from cooperation, tempered by hardship, and sharpened by self-discovery. This moment symbolizes the quiet truth of Silksong. Hornet is not merely ascending Farloom. She is rebuilding herself on the way up. If Hollow Knight was a study in elasticity, the knight bouncing, darting, vibrating between impacts, Silksong is a study in grace under pressure. Hornet does not fight like a vessel. She fights like a dancer caught between instinct and memory. Her body shaped by ritual, her blade shaped by experience. Her combat isn't merely action, it is expression. Farloom sees Hornet not as an intruder, but as a moving problem, a puzzle of steps to decipher. And she answers the world's questions not with words, but with motion. This is why Silksong's combat feels like a conversation, a back and forth, a call and response, a duet of tension. Hornet's combat philosophy, precision in motion. Hornet was raised on threads, knots, pulls, weaving. Her fighting style is an evolution of those principles. She doesn't block, she repositions. She doesn't tank hits, she anticipates them. She doesn't overwhelm, she redirects. In this way, Hornet is less warrior and more weaver of violence. Her combat is based on 1. Momentum, keeping the body in motion, never letting enemies dictate pace. 2. Elevation, using verticality not just to dodge, but to create new attack vectors. 3. Reach her needle gives her arcs Knight couldn't dream of. Lunges, flip strikes, aerial stabs. 4. Rhythm. Every swing is a beat. Every dash is a rest note. Every counter is a measure. Farloom responds accordingly. Enemies do not simply rush Hornet. They read her, they mirror her. They adjust their tempo to match hers. Every fight in Silksong is a battle of rhythm. Stances, the heart of Hornet's combat intelligence. While Knight had a simple forward-facing nail stance, Hornet carries a complex set of combat stances, each with unique animation intent. Your Silksong file references multiple stance changes, which I've expanded into a cohesive combat philosophy. Base stance, the needle guard balanced, fluid, needle angled forward, thread loose. Used for general combat, standard parries, basic strikes, mobility shifts. This is Hornet listening to her opponent. Aggressive stance, the forward lean shoulders dropped, needle tilted slightly down, thread taut. Used when Hornet wants to. Lunge, chain attacks, chase retreating enemies, punish slow telegraphs. The aggressive stance is fast, intimidating, a statement that Hornet has taken control of the tempo. Defensive stance, the silk coil body angled sideways, thread wrapped around her arm, hips lowered. Used for tight dodges, reactive parries, jump cancel counters, stun window exploitation. This is the stance of survival, the one she uses when pushed to the wall. Aerial stance, the needle drop mid-air posture, knees tucked, needle aligned vertically. Used for downward spikes, ricochet attacks, repositioning above enemies, chaining aerial routes. Farloom is a vertical kingdom, so this stance appears constantly. Recovery stance, the silk brace 1 knee down. Thread pulled back into her palm. Used after. Heavy impacts, environmental hazards, interrupted jumps, knockbacks. The stance is brief, almost invisible, but meaningful. Hornet is resetting her rhythm. All stances have microframes of varying vulnerability. Team Cherry designed Hornet not as a tank, but as a dancer who must always stay one beat ahead. Backsteps, the violent ballet of silence. Hornet's backstep is one of the most elegant mechanics in Silksong. She slides backward, needle angled like a predator's fang, body arched in anticipation. The backstep is not simply a dodge, it is a counter cue. In Farloom's combat language, enemies strike on beats, Hornet backsteps on half beats, counters occur on syncopations. This gives every encounter a musical quality. When Hornet backsteps, she creates distance, tension, a brief window of prediction. Enemies with heavy attacks whiff forward. Fast enemies miss the mark entirely. Flyers dive into empty space. Hornet then uses the vacuum created by her absence to step forward with lethal beauty. Backstep, lunge, aerial spike is one of the most natural chains in her arsenal. Thread techniques, combat built from silk. In your file, Hornet silk threads serve multiple purposes, not just traversal or healing. I've reinterpreted them into distinct combat techniques. Silk split Hornet flicks thread to stagger multiple foes. A tiny AoE disruption. Silk pulls small enemies are yanked off balance, not as grapple kills but as positioning tools. Silk coil parry Hornet wraps thread around her needle for enhanced counter timing. Silk bind dash a dash, with slight invincibility tied to thread expenditure. Silk drop Hornet uses the thread like a whip to create downward acceleration during aerial attacks for improved hit confirm windows. Silk isn't just resource, it's personality, a reflection of Hornet's upbringing and trauma, but also her precision and intelligence. Escape sequences, the kingdom that chases back. One of the most thrilling systems referenced in your document are the dynamic escape sequences Silksong uses to escalate tension. These are not scripted chase scenes. They are reaction sequences, the world collapsing, reshaping, and rising against Hornet based on environmental stress, boss AI triggers, corruption levels, player progression, biome tension index. Farloom attacks Hornet with the landscape itself. Types of escape sequences include 1. Collapse runs. Platforms crumble behind Hornet as thread vines snap under structural decay. 2. Pressure sequences rising fluids, gas, or fungal overgrowth force upward or outward movement. 3. Predator pursuits. Large creatures give chase, but their movement is semi-reactive, allowing multiple solutions. 4. Resonant chases enemies track Hornet by sound, requiring careful rhythm and silence. 5. Ascension trials. Vertical races with increasing mobility checks and no ability to stop moving. These sequences are not punishments. They are tests of mastery, forcing players to chain jumps, use wall grabs efficiently, maintain combat rhythm, recognize escape lines, weave movement and attacks. Silksong is designed so that the player must stay sharp. Momentum and awareness become survival. Enemy motion philosophy. Farloom learns from you. A defining trait in your source shows that Farloom's creatures evolve subtly. Flyers adjust altitude based on your previous jumps. Stalkers learn your healing timing. Burrowers delay emergence if you stand still too long. Guarding enemies widen their spacing after repeated backsteps. Multi-foe groups split apart if you chain downward strikes. Farloom is studying Hornet, not through AI difficulty spikes, but through behavioral imitation. Every fight feels personal. Every region feels alive. Every victory feels earned. Hornet must not only fight the kingdom, she must outthink its reflexes. Why Hornet moves like a dancer? Instead of a warrior, Silksong's entire philosophy of combat is built around 3 principles. 1. Tension is grace. Hornet uses her needle not as a heavy nail, but as an extension of her whole body's momentum. 2. Rhythm is survival. Every movement creates a beat, and Farloom responds to that beat. 3. Ascension requires intention. Hornet is not descending like the knight. She's climbing, fighting up, not down, improving, not withering, becoming, not diminishing. Where many games create difficulty through punishment, Silksong creates difficulty through elegance. The more elegant the player becomes, the more fluid the world responds. The less elegant the player becomes, the more violent the world feels. Combat is not combat. Combat is choreography. Hornet isn't just surviving, she's performing. Some kingdoms are held together by architecture, some by politics, some by force. Farloom, however, is held together by systems. Tiny, invisible rules that weave quietly beneath the surface. Players see only the largest patterns. Bosses, biomes, traversal routes, major enemies, but just beneath that layer lives an intricate network of micromechanics. Tiny interactions, reactions, and emergent behaviors that create a sense of living complexity. These aren't tutorials, they aren't HUD indicators, they aren't spelled out in dialogue. They are the heartbeat of the kingdom. And if you look closely, you begin to notice a world that reacts not because it has been programmed to, but because it has been taught to respond. Cogflies, the most dangerous creatures in Farloom, are the smallest. Your uploaded document references poisoned cogflies, one of the most deceptively complex mechanics in Silksong's ecosystem. At first glance, cogflies look harmless. Tiny, metal-winged insects that buzz around ruins like drifting sparks. But their behavior reveals the depth of Farloom's design. Cogflies have emotional triggers. Each cogfly is tied to an internal state. Alertness, curiosity, fear, aggression. Rather than simply attack or retreat, the cogfly evaluates Hornet's movements, environmental cues, and even the presence of other creatures. If Hornet enters stealthily, the cogfly remains curious, following her at a cautious distance. If Hornet moves erratically, the cogfly becomes alert. And if she strikes one, they swarm. Tiny threats snowball into overwhelming danger because cogflies operate like signal boosters. Poisoned cogflies, Farloom's most subtle trap. Poisoned cogflies are not naturally toxic. They are contaminated by fungal bloom, chemical runoff, corrupted fluids, decaying machinery. When poisoned, their wings flicker with an unstable metallic hum. They move erratically. They trail faint toxic particles that linger in the air. Hornet never becomes immune to this threat. The particles drift into thin corridors, onto ledges, into tight vertical shafts. It is not the cogfly that kills you. It's the space you are forced to move into afterward. This is Farloom's most frightening design principle. Even the quietest creatures can reshape entire fights. Behavioral microloops, enemies that feel like they think you, included sections describing how enemies shift their behavior as Hornet progresses. From that foundation, I expanded Silksong's emotional AI system. Enemies learn from the rhythm of your movement. If you favor rapid attacks, they widen openings. If you wait too long, they pressure forward. If you dodge upward constantly, they rise to match altitude. Enemies learn from the tone of sound. Silksong's sound-based combat affects enemy states. Soft landings calm predators. Loud clashes attract new threats. Rapid silk snaps irritate sensitive mobs. Heavy impacts intimidate scavengers. Enemies learn from environmental stress. If an area has seen too much fighting, some enemies enter a panic state. Others hide. Some go dormant. Scavengers arrive early. This makes Farloom feel alive, as if the kingdom records violence like memories. Performance logic. Enemies that see Hornet as an audience. The concept of performances in your source document is one of the most original world-building threads in Silksong. Some creatures don't fight for territory, they fight for attention. These performers treat combat like ritual. Some bow before attacking. Others scream like stage cues. Some sync their movements to ambient rhythms. Some retreat purely to reposition dramatically. When Hornet enters their arena, they perform violence in the same way Trobio performs music. This mechanic does not alter stats, but it alters psychology. Each performance-based enemy taunts, feints, changes pacing theatrically, demands that Hornet fight with awareness, not just reflex. One creature, for example, hops onto a higher platform, not for tactical advantage, but for dramatic silhouette against bioluminescent backgrounds. Another spreads its wings wide before diving in a perfectly symmetrical arc. They fight to be seen. Farloom is a kingdom constructed on obsession, and these creatures reflect that obsession through combat as theatre. Environmental moods. The world itself has emotions. Your file references multiple subtle environmental shifts based on state-of-world progression. I've expanded these into a full system. Farloom's biomes have moods. Silksong's biomes aren't just visually distinct. Their sound behavior defines them. Grey Moor. A wet, resonant cave where all sound travels farther than expected, causing overstimulation in many local creatures. Coral Bastion's sound echoes through hard surfaces, triggering chain reactions in patrolling guards. Bone Plains, a place made from hollow, fossilized bone. Walking here is like moving through a cathedral of echoes. Labyrinth spools. Thick silk muffles everything, making movement feel eerie and intimate. Giltwater distortion changes sound pitch, misleading enemies and Hornet alike. Each region behaves like its own musical instrument. The thread sound, Hornet's signature. Hornet's jump is a pluck. Her dash is a glide. Her parry is a bell. Her healing is a hum. Her silk strike is a crack of lightning. Shamar designed the thread to have its own sonic identity, separate from weapon strikes. Predators learn this signature quickly. It is how they recognize her, fear her, or prepare for her. To some, she is a threat. To others, she is a song. Why Silksong makes sound a core system? Because Farloom is a kingdom built on rules too old to write and too subtle to see. The only way to understand it is to listen. Shamar doesn't write music for the game. He reveals the music already living in the world. Enemies don't react to sound randomly. They perform in response. And Hornet isn't just a warrior. She is a conductor. Farloom's soundtrack isn't a background. It is the kingdom breathing. Every note matters. Every movement matters. In Silksong, the world listens when you fight and sings back when you move. Travel in Farloom is not simply movement. It is ritual, geometry, a conversation between the traveler and the land itself. Where Hallowness used stags, creatures loyal and memory-rooted, Farloom uses something far stranger, bell beasts. They are not loyal. They are not tamed. They are not nostalgic. They are opportunists. Living tuning forks wrapped in exoskeleton and muscle, drawn not to Hornet's presence, but to the frequencies she produces. Understanding them is the first step in understanding Farloom's philosophy. Everything that moves follows a pattern. What a bell beast really is. At first glance, bell beasts look like armored quadrupeds with smooth plates of ceramic chitin. Their faces resemble bells turned upside down, with a hollow resonance cavity in the skull where a forehead should be. They are vibratory animals. They see, not with eyes, but with oscillation. When Hornet approaches one, its head hums, a low, almost mechanical tone, as if the creature is sniffing the air for rhythm. When she leaps near them, the hum shifts pitch. When she dashes, the resonance tightens. And when she strikes her needle, bell beasts respond instantly. They awaken. This is the key behind Farloom's fast travel. Bell beasts activate when the right rhythm reaches them. Not magic, not technology. Biomechanical, instinct. The bell sanctuaries, Farloom's tuning stations. Bell beasts do not wander the world freely. They roost in carved chambers known as sanctuaries, each shaped like a domain of sound. These sanctuaries are constructed of curved stone arches, hollow columns, suspended plates that vibrate easily, chords that resonate when stepped on. They act as massive amplifiers. Hornet's movements inside these rooms, every jump, attack, or landing, produce resonance patterns that bell beasts can identify from miles away. When the correct sequence is produced, the bell beast arrives. It's fast, it's jarring, it's almost teleportation, but grounded in biology rather than magic. This system forces the player to engage with sound, with intention, with rhythm, rather than simply unlocking stations like a checklist. Silksong doesn't ask, "Where do you want to go?" It asks, "How well do you understand this world's music?" Bell beast personalities. Every mount is different. Unlike the stag in Hollow Knight, bell beasts do not share a unified temperament. Each has a unique hum, a preferred frequency, a movement style, a degree of skittishness, a particular way of dropping Hornet off. Some feel like loyal steeds. Others feel like wild animals tolerating her presence for a moment. The more sanctuaries unlocked, the better Hornet becomes at playing their summoning rhythm, and the easier it becomes to travel fluidly across Farloom. But early in the game, bell beasts feel almost unpredictable. They growl, they hesitate, they stomp the ground. They let small jets of air whistle out of their bell skulls. Fast travel feels alive, not a mechanic to exploit, a creature to negotiate with. The logic of roots, why Farloom isn't built like Hallownest. The team behind Silksong didn't design Farloom like a spiderweb. They designed it like a loom. Movement is woven. Horizontal paths cross vertical shafts. Narrow tunnels connect to open chambers. Silk lines create shortcuts. Collapsed architectures provide drop routes that intentionally bypass large sections. The result is that Farloom feels taller, but also tighter. It forces players to think like Hornet. Verticality first, precision second, rhythm always. This design philosophy echoes through every movement mechanic. Hornet's quicker climb, her ability to grab ledges, her needle vault, her silk grapple, her faster dash recoil. She isn't built to wander. She's built to ascend. Farloom wants you to climb its problems the same way Hornet climbs its towers. Alternate routes, Farloom's hidden doors and shadow paths. One of the secret strengths of Silksong's world layout is that almost every region contains a main route, a side route, a predator route, a vertical alternate, and a Hornet-only traversal path. Your document hints at a design philosophy where many rooms contain secondary ceilings or subfloor networks, usable only with late-game tools. This means Farloom is not just interconnected, it is layered. Some alternate paths are predator carves tunnels dug by large beasts, fast but dangerous, forgotten weaver lines, old silk bridges that require careful grappling, broken ascension shafts, vertical channels that lead to early skips if the player is observant enough, root mazes, plant-grown tunnels that connect biomes quietly, architect channels, man-made tubes hidden behind ornamented walls, their entrances disguised as decorative carvings. These optional routes feel like secrets, but they are actually the intended way for skilled players to move elegantly through Farloom. Silksong rewards mastery of movement more than mastery of combat. The economy of movement, Farloom's implicit rules. Unlike Hallownest, Farloom doesn't reward curiosity with lore alone. It rewards it with efficiency. The more you understand the world's rhythms, the faster you can move through it. Movement becomes resource management. Shortcuts save thread. Cleaner landings reduce enemy aggression. Quiet routes avoid predators. Jump chains keep momentum. Silk lines create escape paths. Hornet isn't just a fighter. She's a dancer, a climber, a tactician. Her kit is designed so that travel can be as expressive as combat. This is why her movement feels so acrobatic. She isn't wandering a kingdom. She is weaving through it. Bell-beasts and narrative symbolism. Your source material hints at a subtle narrative role. Bell-beasts aren't merely transit animals. They are mirrors of Farloom's soul. They respond only when the kingdom approves of you, or at least tolerates you. In the early game, they hesitate. Their hum trembles. They require precise rhythm to summon. In the mid-game, they become more responsive. Their resonance aligns naturally with Hornet's movements. In the endgame, they approach eagerly, because the world has accepted Hornet's role, however violent or sacrificial it must become. Bell-beasts measure Hornet's journey the same way a needle measures thread. Their behavior is the silent narrative barometer of Farloom's transformation. Fast travel as storytelling. By late game, Bell-beasts begin leaving behind subtle emotional cues. Soft resonance when Hornet is injured. Protective growls when enemies are near. A gentle drop-off animation if the story has reached darker sections. They react to corruption levels. They react to boss progression. Some even avoid regions overtaken by plague or ruin. Travel isn't detached from narrative. The way Bell-beasts behave tells you how Farloom is feeling. Why movement is central to Silksong's identity. Movement defines Hornet. Movement defines Farloom. Movement defines the entire philosophy of the sequel. Where Hollow Knight was a study in lingering melancholy, Silksong is a study in momentum. Hornet's story isn't slow death, it's rapid ascent. She doesn't sink deeper, she climbs higher. Her tools emphasize flow. Her combat emphasizes speed, and her traversal emphasizes intent. And Bell-beasts, strange humming creatures pulled by rhythm, serve as the perfect representation of what Silksong truly is. a kingdom of vibration, a world tuned by conflict, a land that moves when you move and waits when you stop. Farloom isn't walked. Farloom is played, like an instrument, like a partner, like a riddle, like a kingdom listening for the right song. Farloom is a kingdom obsessed with perfection, not beauty, not strength, not purity, perfection through creation. Almost every major NPC tied to progression in Silksong belongs to a guild of makers, shapers of metal, manipulators of thread, sculptors of essence, researchers of shells, where hollowness was sustained by memory and infection. Farloom survives through craft. And woven into the kingdom's survival are four figures who act as the backbone of Hornet's evolution. Neolin, the master of precision tools. Forge Daughter, the keeper of the furnace heart. Apprentice Bellow, whose eagerness is both blessing and danger. The Mask Maker, enigmatic sculptor of identity. These artisans are not optional flavor. They define the rules of Farloom itself. Neolin, the silent engineer of Hornet's arsenal. Neolin is the first craftsman most players meet, yet also one of the hardest to fully understand. He is calm, deliberate, and strangely serene. A bug who measures the world not in emotions but in angles. The glint of a blade reflects better in his eyes than the warmth of sunlight. His workshop is arranged like a diagram. Tools on walls in perfect spacing. Unfinished prototypes laid out by size. Blueprints pinned with geometric precision. Bellows polished to mirror sheen. Neolin doesn't see weapons as extensions of violence. He sees them as extensions of purpose. To him, every tool Hornet uses is a conversation. What do you want to become? What are you willing to sacrifice? What rhythm fits your hand best? When Hornet upgrades a tool, Neolin studies her, not the metal. He watches how she stands, how tightly she holds her needle, how far her arm moves on each strike, how her thread hums when she weaves it. Then, without compliment or criticism, he quietly reshapes the tool to match her evolving nature. Working with him is like stepping into a meditation. Neolin doesn't tell Hornet what to do. He reveals what she already knows she must become. Forge Daughter, keeper of the living fire. If Neolin is the mind of Farloom's craft, then Forge Daughter is the heart. Her furnace isn't just hot, it is alive. Your uploaded document implies that her forge pulses, breathes, and glows with a slow rhythm of molten soul. The daughter tends to it like one tends a child, feeding the fire minerals, whispering to the metal, brushing cinders from her mask, shaping heated tools with a dancer's grace. Every movement she makes feels ritualistic. The furnace responds in kind, flaring and dimming like a heartbeat sinking to hers. Forge Daughter's upgrades often focus on durability, elemental charge, resonance-enhancing traits, reforgings that require emotional intention. She speaks little, but her tools speak for her. When Hornet returns with rare materials found deep in Farloom, Forge Daughter touches them as if reading their memories, sensing the climates, dangers, and histories they have absorbed. Then she turns those memories into strength. Forge Daughter believes every blade carries a story. She ensures Hornet's story becomes sharp enough to survive. Apprentice Bellow, fire, ambition, and almost disaster. Where Forge Daughter is serene, Bellow is volatility incarnate. The first time Hornet meets him, he is already covered in soot, panting from overexertion, and brimming with ideas that exceed both his skill and his common sense. He dreams of tools that explode, tools that spin, tools that create sound waves, tools that channel silk too dangerously fast. To Bello, craftsmanship is thrill, creation is adrenaline. But his enthusiasm carries a sweetness, the earnest desire to contribute, even if he occasionally melts something he shouldn't. Bello's role in your source material seems tied to intermediate upgrades, not refined work, not masterpieces, experiments. His enhancements often add speed with a cost, power with recoil, range with instability, effects that feel like barely contain magic. He mirrors Hornet's own youthful energy, sharp, fast, hopeful, often reckless. Working with him is like sparring with fire that hasn't chosen its shape yet. But within his chaotic creativity lies something genuine. Bello wants to be better. For Farloom, for the craft, for himself. Hornet's success inspires him. He grows because she grows. He believes because she fights. The mask maker, sculptor of identity and echoes. Far more mysterious than any smith or engineer, the mask maker stands at the crossroads between art and metaphysics. Masks in the world of Hollow Knight carry meaning, protection, persona, memory, hierarchy. But in Farloom, the mask maker understands something deeper. Masks shape the self. Masks are the self. His workshop is a cathedral of faces, sorrow carved into clay, pride sculpted in marble, triumph etched into obsidian, fear pressed into dry bone, confusion moulded in pollen wax. Some masks breathe faintly, others twitch when approached. A few hum with residual emotion, as if holding the echo of their past wearers. The mask maker specializes in augmenting Hornet's defensive and spiritual capacity, improving resistance, altering perception, tuning emotional resilience, producing masks with unique sensory boosts. He speaks in riddles. Your face is not your truth, but your truth will choose a face. He doesn't see Hornet as a warrior. He sees her as a concept still evolving. Working with him is unsettling because it forces Hornet and the player to confront who she is becoming, not just physically, emotionally. Masks, after all, hide and reveal at the same time. The philosophy of craft in Farloom. Why does Silksong lean so heavily on artisans? Why are creation and refinement woven into the narrative? Because Farloom itself is a kingdom sculpted by obsession. Its philosophies echo through every craft. Neolin teaches precision, enemy territories, boss arenas, hazard clusters, hidden passages. Red is instinct. Purple is understanding. The system isn't a gimmick. It's an expression of Farloom's philosophy. You cannot know a place until it tests you. And the quills make mapping feel alive, dynamic, and deeply tied to Hornet's actions. Trobio, the performer who turns struggle into song. At first glance, Trobio seems like a wanderer with a lute and a flair for theatrics. But he is actually one of the kingdom's emotional anchors. Whenever Hornet accomplishes something meaningful, Trobio appears to commemorate the moment with music. Not celebratory music, interpretive music. His songs shift based on the biome's mood, Hornet's tools, the bosses defeated, the corruption level of the region. Sometimes he plays hopeful tunes, other times haunting melodies that echo the decay beneath Farloom's beauty. He is not just a performer. He is a historian preserving memory through sound. Players discovered that if you revisit Trobio after major world changes, especially after large corruption events, his entire repertoire alters subtly, turning cheerful dances into melancholic refrains. He is the emotional diary of Farloom. Why these characters matter: Krat, Chakra, the quill system, and Trobio form a quiet quartet of storytelling. Krat shows us Farloom's humanity. Chakra reveals how the world thinks. The quills turn exploration into dialogue. Trobio records the kingdom's heartbeat. They are not random NPCs. They are scaffolding. They teach the player the rules of Silksong's world. Everything adapts, everything watches, everything responds. Nothing is static. Nothing is meaningless. Farloom is alive not because of its monsters, but because of its people. And long before the plot reveals its secrets, these early encounters whisper the real truth. The kingdom is listening. The kingdom is learning. And the kingdom expects you to change with it. Farloom may appear delicate and ornate at first glance, but beneath its beauty lies a kingdom engineered for survival, not through brute strength, not through magical intervention, but through one of the most elaborate natural ecosystems in the Hollow Knight universe. Every creature, every fungus, every crawling shape of the kingdom fulfills a purpose. And those purposes intersect in strange, elegant ways. Where Hallownest was a kingdom of remembering, Farloom is a kingdom of recycling. Nothing dies here without feeding something else. Nothing collapses without being cleaned, rewritten, or consumed by the world that birthed it. The ants, Farloom's silent custodians. One of the most striking ecological behaviors in your original file is the presence of the ants, tiny workers scattered across the kingdom, who fulfill a role rarely seen in Metroidvanias. They clean up corpses, including those of bosses. This is not a gruesome detail. It is a philosophical one. The ants of Farloom are designed to remove dead bodies, recycle organic matter, prevent corruption from spreading, maintain the balance of rot and renewal. They are the kingdom's unseen custodians, scurrying in small clusters to reclaim death and turn it back into life. When Hornet defeats a boss or mini-boss, it isn't unusual to return later and find nothing but immaculate ground. No body, no debris, no lingering trace of violence, only a faint rustle or a trail of tiny footprints hinting that the ants have already come and gone. It's a chilling but beautiful detail. Farloom never lets its dead become monuments. It recycles them into the next cycle of survival. This gives the world a creepy, almost emotionless efficiency, like a kingdom obsessed with order, cleanliness, and the removal of waste. And it sets the stage for the next ecological phenomenon. Cragglers, protectors, parents, and moving ecosystems. Cragglers are some of Farloom's most misunderstood inhabitants. They appear large, armored, almost hostile. But in truth, they are guided by gentle biological imperatives. Cragglers are parents. They build nests. They guard their young. And they use their size not as weapons, but as shields. One of the most fascinating details from your file is the way Craggler babies behave. When Hornet approaches, the tiny ones scatter, curling themselves into ball shapes, rolling behind adults for protection. The adult Cragglers then rise from the brush or stone, shifting slowly to create a living wall between Hornet and their young. This is not aggression, it is strategy. Cragglers don't fight Hornet unless provoked. They simply create distance. A silent gesture that says, "This is our space, respect it." It makes Farloom feel real. Hornet is not the center of the ecosystem. She is an intruder, a trespasser, a moving threat the wildlife must navigate around. And that sense of realism deepens with one of the strangest locations connected to these creatures. Vault Nest, Farloom's secret cradle of decay. Hidden beneath layers of vines and stone sits one of the kingdom's most mysterious biological structures. The Vault Nest. Not a dungeon, not a tomb, not a prison, a nursery. A place where the kingdom incubates the next generation of its scavengers and cleaners. The Vault Nest pulses with life. Not hostile life, but function-driven life. Larvae cling to its walls. Strange fungal membranes form protective sacs. Ant workers weave tunnels between pods, tending to the ecosystem like gardeners cultivating a living archive. When Hornet stumbles upon it, there is no boss music, no dramatic reveal, just a slow, unsettling realization. This place wasn't meant to be seen by anyone except the insects who maintain it. The vault nest symbolizes Farloom's biological philosophy. Decay is not failure. Decay is fuel. Decay is continuity. The kingdom grows from its dead with the same elegance. It grows from its living. Early Moss Grotto, Farloom's first lesson in life and death. A major component in your file concerns the early Moss Grotto zone, a biome that sets the tone for everything that follows. Moss Grotto is not lush. It is damp, mouldy, a place overgrown with organisms that digest rather than bloom. Its enemies aren't predators, they're decomposers. The most significant behaviors include enemies attracted to fresh corpses, spore clouds triggered by vibration, hyphae that retract into walls when hit, moss creatures that protect egg clusters, rot lurkers that emerge only after long silence. It's here the player learns the rule Farloom lives by. Everything eats. Everything feeds something. Even Hornet, by fighting, becomes part of this cycle. Her battles leave vibrations. Her presence clutters ecosystems. Her movement triggers predatory behaviors. The Moss Grotto is the kingdom's first whisper. You may be powerful, but you are not above us. Predator-scavenger cycles and micro-ecosystems. One detail from your script that expands beautifully is Farloom's micro-ecosystems. Instead of generic enemies placed randomly, creatures in Silksong stalk prey, retreat to nests, hide food, clean territory, sense when another predator has passed by, compete for ecological roles. Some zones even contain enemies that only spawn after larger predators have been defeated, as if the ecosystem is actively rearranging itself to compensate for a missing apex threat. A few core examples. The red ring hunter, a solitary predator that marks territory with scratch lines. Remove it, and smaller beasts expand into the vacuum. The needlefly swarm, aggressive in low food cycles, passive in high food cycles. They behave differently depending on how many creatures Hornet has recently defeated. The Gelbrood carrion pickers appear only near fresh kills to scavenge. Disappear entirely if Hornet fights too aggressively, sensing danger in her scent trail. These systems are not superficial. They give the impression of a kingdom running simulations beneath its skin. Farloom isn't just a map. It's a terrarium, a place where creatures react to death the way trees react to rain. Why Farloom's ecosystem matters to the story. Silksong's narrative doesn't lean on kingdoms or kings. It leans on cycles. Cycles of violence, cycles of decay, cycles of desire, hunger, instinct, and survival. In Farloom, cleaners remove the dead, predators test the strong, parents shelter the weak, scavengers repurpose the fallen, plants and fungi reclaim whatever's left. Every layer of the kingdom mirrors Hornet's personal journey. She too becomes part of a cycle she never asked to join. She too must protect, consume, and adapt. She too becomes something the world must learn to accommodate. And as she moves through each biome, the ecosystem rearranges itself accordingly. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. Farloom is not an antagonist. It is a living body. And Hornet is not simply a visitor. She is a disturbance, a catalyst, a change. If Hallownest was a kingdom that remembered, Farloom is a kingdom that listens. Its walls echo not with ghosts, but with sound, living sound. sound that changes shape depending on who wields it. And at the center of Farloom's acoustic mystery stands Sharma, the composer whose work doesn't simply underscore the world, it animates it. The world as an instrument. Most games compose music to match emotion. Silksong composes emotion to match movement. The moment Hornet enters Farloom, the world responds to her presence with tones, tiny, flickering cues from stone, silk, machinery, and even the enemies themselves. Every zone is tuned. Every enemy has pitch. Every battle is a duet. And everything, from fungus to bell beast, follows the same strange law. Motion creates melody. Hornet doesn't just fight, she plays. Sharma's dream, a living soundtrack. In your document, Sharma is described as a composer whose melodies shift dynamically, not just based on progress, but based on survival. He is a mythic figure in Farloom, known for hearing the world differently than others. To Sharma, rustling moss is harmony, skittering bugs are percussion, wind is a choir, metal is a bass line, battle is improvisation. He believes Farloom is a symphony waiting to be conducted. But what makes his music extraordinary isn't the notes he writes. It's the notes he doesn't. Because Sharma's scores leave open spaces, gaps where the world inserts its own voice. These gaps invite enemy shrieks, parry rings, silk snaps, hornets leaps, ambient creatures howling in the distance. The soundtrack reacts like a breathing organism. When Hornet leaps into battle, Sharma's score rises. When she falls to a lower platform, the bass drops. When she clings to a wall, the strings soften. Each piece has dozens of micro layers, woven so meticulously that no two fights ever feel identical. In Farloom, the soundtrack remembers your movements and sings them back to you. Enemies that hear you. One of the most fascinating ideas in your original file is that enemies are sound reactive, not through stealth mechanics alone, but through emotional acoustics. Some creatures respond to the sharp sound of a parry, the flutter of Hornet's jump, the rhythmic bounce of her dash, the crack of a silk thread, the landing vibration of heavy tools. In certain biomes, even silence triggers reactions. For example, in Moss Grotto, silence attracts burrowers. They sense vibration, not motion, and rise only when Hornet stands still too long. In Royal Bluffs, shrieks bounce across cliffs, summoning flyers that swarm toward the sound. In Greymoor, a single misstep echoes through cavern ribs, alerting patrolling predators before they enter the screen. Enemies don't just live in the world, they interpret it. And this makes Farloom feel like a kingdom built around listening, observing, and responding. Combat as conversation. Hornet's weapons, needles, tools, silk threads, aren't just damaging, they're communicative. Every successful strike releases a clear, bright ting, a sound folded into Sharma's compositions. But more importantly, enemies react to those sounds emotionally. Feral crawlers grow more cautious after repeated hits, their movements stuttering in uncertainty. Bell spinners become enraged when their silk lines resonate, tightening the arena's pressure. Fossil stalkers retreat when hearing the harmonic resonance of their own armor cracking. Royal hounds respond to certain pitches by entering parry states. These are not random quirks. They're systems tied to Farloom's philosophy. Sound is survival. Silence is vulnerability. Every clang, every scrape, every needle thread snap creates a ripple through the ecosystem. Hornet doesn't overpower enemies. She outplays them, in the musical sense. Verticality and sound behavior. Silksong is significantly more vertical than Hollow Knight, and this verticality dramatically affects sound. Each zone contains echo zones, where sound doubles and ricochets, alerting enemies multiple platforms away. Dead zones, areas padded with silk, moss, or fungal insulation that muffle noise completely. Resonant columns, long shafts where Hornet's movement produces harmonic tones that change enemy patterns below. Stress beats, sound cues triggered by Hornet's stamina. When she is low on thread, her movements become slightly more brittle sounding, alerting predators to vulnerability. Shamar's brilliance is that none of these are obvious. You feel them more than you see them. The world reacts subtly, but undeniably. The Shamar Chambers, sound labs, hidden through Farloom. Your file describes Shamar's chambers, experimental rooms where sound becomes gameplay. These chambers contain collapsing platforms triggered by pitch, enemies that only attack when they hear silence, sonic puzzles requiring specific impact rhythms, resonance plates that sing when struck in the correct sequence. In one chamber, 3 spires emit faint tones, high, mid, and low. Strike them in the right order, and the room changes shape. Walls shift, platforms realign. A locked gate dissolves into sound. Silksong uses sound not just as atmosphere, but as architecture. These chambers feel like stepping into Shamar's mind, a place where the rules of the world rearrange themselves at the will of melody. Enemies that sing. Some enemies don't just react to sound, they contribute. Chitterlings hum low tones before attacking, their harmony tightening as more appear. Ostronon flyers emit shrill calls that weaken defensive mobs nearby. Weavers communicate in percussive clicks, building internal rhythm maps of the arena. Dreadmoths release dissonant screeches that disrupt Hornet's healing sequence. Fights with these creatures feel choreographed, like duets that continuously evolve. One moment the rhythm is slow, another moment it becomes manic, all depending on how Hornet and her foes exchange attacks. Players who learn the rhythm gain a silent advantage. Those who don't drown in noise. Regions with unique sound identity. Bellheart doesn't introduce itself with grandeur or spectacle. It greets you the way a half-broken instrument might. Soft, hesitant, and slightly out of tune. When Hornet first steps into the settlement, it feels more like a memory of a town than a living one. Empty windows, abandoned stalls, a silence thick enough to taste. But the moment Widow falls, and Hornet begins patching together the town's fractured requests, Bellheart shifts. Barely at first. A lantern rehung, a building swept clean, a murmured thank you from someone who hasn't had hope in years. And then Pavo appears. He is impossible to miss. Eager, bright-eyed, and carrying the kind of optimism that seems almost rebellious in a place like Farloom. As soon as the civic wishes are fulfilled, he flags Hornet down, nearly vibrating with excitement. He thanks her, not as a hero, not as a savior, but as a neighbor, and presses a small, polished key into her hands. It opens Bell home. Not just another door, the first true refuge Hornet can claim as her own since arriving in this harsh kingdom. The Bell home, a quiet room in a loud world. When that lock finally clicks open, it's startling how gentle the interior feels. A bed that acts like a bench, soft enough for Hornet to curl into a tiny sleeping animation if you let her rest. A space where she isn't mid-battle or mid-escape, but simply breathing. Players quickly gave it a name, Hornet's nap spot. Sit still, and she folds herself into a relaxed coil, an animation so intimate and unexpected that it instantly became one of the game's most beloved secrets. Inside that room, the world pauses. You can even pull up the map while she rests, as if she's planning routes with you, mind quiet but intent. With Frey the furniture merchant unlocked, the home becomes customizable. Small details, lamps, lacquer colors, a practical desk that lets Hornet examine relics and palm cylinders transform the space into something more than a resting point. It becomes a statement. In a world of steel, silk, and danger, Hornet carves out warmth for herself, a home glowing against the dark. Bellheart's transformation mirrors Hornet's own. The town evolves slowly. At first it's bleak, hollow. By the time the Bell home is fully yours, lit, furnished, touched with color, Bellheart feels reborn. And that rebirth parallels Hornet herself. She begins as a wanderer, an outsider dragged into someone else's nightmare. But through every restored bench, every repaired wall, every tiny spark of life, she becomes something else. Not just a survivor, not just a fighter, a protector. Bellheart doesn't simply get rebuilt. It recognizes her. The hunter is gone, but someone better took their place. Fans of Hollow Knight naturally looked for the hunter, the gruff chronicler who once documented every creature with poetic menace. Silksong doesn't bring him back. Instead, it gives us someone who fills that role so completely and so differently that she redefines the field guide system. Her name is New. She's a scholar with eyes far too bright for a place like Farloom, found near the halfway home bench in Grey Moor. Where the hunter was intimidating, New is enthusiastic to the point of adorable. Her energy feels like someone who would gladly sleep beside her notebooks. Upon meeting Hornet, she hands over the Bugs of Farloom compendium, Silksong's evolution of the hunter's journal, and starts you on her personal quest, the field study wish. The rules are simple. Defeat a creature, unlock its entry. Defeat multiples, unlock deeper notes. Catalog 100 distinct species. Earn your first major reward, a tool pouch upgrade. But Team Cherry doesn't stop there. New isn't static. She doesn't stay put. She doesn't vanish after handing you a book. After major boss fights, she reappears organically, perched on cliffs or ruins, quietly observing creatures in their natural habitats. Players have found her in the Marrow, in Shellwood, on ledges above the blasted steppes, always humming, always scribbling, always learning. She remarks on how beautiful certain creatures are, even the ones that nearly just killed you. It's a soft, humorous contrast to Hollow Knight's original hunter, whose entries were written like threats. Where the hunter brooded, New gushes. Where the hunter judged, New marvels. Through her, Farloom feels less like a battlefield and more like a living ecosystem worth understanding. Completionists get a final tribute. If you fill every entry, over 200 unique enemies, the reward is a callback wrapped in new meaning. The hunter's memento and the true hunter achievement. It's poetic, a spiritual handshake between the first game and the sequel. New's arc has two phases. First, she is a key early game guide. Later, she becomes a quiet, long-term companion who grows with Hornet's journey. Her presence is subtle, easy to miss, never forced. But it's one of the game's most beautiful threads of world building. In the kingdom of Farloom, death is not a curtain closing. It is a hinge, a turning point, a force that shapes the land and the traveler who dares to cross it. But for those who crave a challenge that strips away hesitation and demands nothing less than perfection, Farloom offers something else entirely. A path where death does not instruct, it erases. A path woven from tension, precision, and the fragile thrill of knowing that every mistake is absolute. Players call it many names: permadeath mode, ironweave, lifeline challenge. But within the lore of Farloom, it has a quieter, more poetic title, The Trial of Steel, a run where Hornet has one life, one thread, one unbroken line stretching across the entire tale. Lose it, and everything, every map, every tool, every triumph, vanishes like dust escaping between fingers. Why this mode exists, at all lore scholars believe, The Trial of Steel wasn't created to punish players. It was born from Farloom's worldview. Only through tension does thread gain purpose. The kingdom itself is obsessed with trials, ascension, purification through hardship. Hornet is absorbing not just its physical dangers, but its ideology. So the Trial of Steel feels less like a gameplay toggle and more like a final exam written by the land itself. The two entrances into the trial. In your original script, the mode has two legitimate unlock paths, mirroring Hollow Knight's traditions while expanding their meaning. Path 1, the quiet unlock, a natural lore-driven activation. Complete a specific chain of tasks, unspoken, subtle, but perfectly aligned with Hornet's personal journey, and the mode soft activates. No fanfare, no notification, just a new option waiting for you on a perfect file, like a door that has always been there but only now chooses to open. Path 2. The code, a secret input, a whisper of nostalgia, a callback to a famous gaming lineage. In Hollow Knight, the Konami code was Team Cherry's playful nod to classic difficulty modes. Here, its reinterpretation operates like a charm sewn into the fabric of Farloom, an old-world cheat reimagined as a ritual. Input it at the right screen with the right rhythm, and the Trial of Steel blooms open like a trapdoor beneath your feet. The reference remains intact, the context is transformed. What changes when you walk the steel path? The difference is not merely death deletes the save. Silksong approaches deathlessness as a shift in tone, balance and stakes. 1. Healing becomes strategy, not salvation. Hornet's weaving heals beautifully, but slowly. In this mode, every self-heal echoes like a confession. Time stretches. Enemies sense openings. The world grows sharper around you. Healing is no longer comfort. It is commitment. 2. Enemy aggression increases in subtle ways, not by raw numbers, but by behavior. Certain enemies punish hesitation, counter after your parries, reposition faster, add variance to their movement loops. It's like the world itself takes fighting you more personally. 3. Navigation requires precision instead of memory. Safe rooms feel rarer. Long stretches between benches require emotional pacing, not just technical skill. Every drop, every jump, every climb becomes a tiny promise you must keep. The Trial of Steel turns every hallway into a razor. Why players attempt? It's some want the achievement, some want the bragging rights, but most attempt the steel path for the feeling it creates, the sensation of total attention. No autopilot, no absent-minded wandering, no checking your phone while walking through a quiet area. In this mode, the world grips you by the ribs and makes you present. It makes you alive, the achievement that watches you. In your original file, completing the mode awarded the Steelheart achievement. But what the game doesn't say outright is that this achievement is meant to be a mirror, a reminder, a question. Were you brave or were you lucky? The answer doesn't matter. What matters is that you reach the end still breathing. The emotional arc of a steel run. Players who finish describe the same 3 stages. Early game. Fear everything feels lethal, even harmless enemies. Every shadow is a threat. Every hit is a wound to the soul. Mid-game. Precision. You begin to understand the flow of Farloom. You move with intent, like a blade dancing through cloth. Final hours. Transcendence. You stop thinking about dying. You start thinking about becoming. The mode stops being punishment and becomes pilgrimage. Why Team Cherry added this, at l'estimteur, all because Silksong, like Hollow Knight before it, is a story about tension, resilience, precision, purpose forged through pressure. The Trial of Steel isn't just a difficulty setting. It is a philosophy. Some threads are tested not to be broken, but to prove what they can hold. The moment Silksong boots up, before battles unfold, before Farloom breathes or Hornet leaps into frame, the game quietly reveals one of its most beautiful narrative tools, its menus. Where most games use title screens as simple decoration, Silksong treats them like emotional checkpoints, each visual palette marking where Hornet stands in her journey and where the player stands in theirs. They aren't just menus, they're mirrors. In your original script, these styles appear linked to endings, milestones, and symbolic states of the world. Here, we reinterpret them with expanded depth and emotional framing. The philosophy behind menu styles. Silksong uses UI the way a painter uses color, not to decorate, but to communicate. Every style represents a world view, an emotional state Hornet inhabits, a stage of Farloom's collapse or healing, the player's own progress. They function like flags, quiet, subtle, honest. Unlocking a menu theme is a silent milestone, a soft acknowledgement that you've pushed the story into a place where the world itself now looks different. Each of these 5 styles becomes a chapter marker for both the narrative and the soul. Style 1. Citadel, the cold ascension. This theme is the default. Carved stone, pale blues, silver hues, sharp geometry. It reflects Farloom as Hornet first discovers it. Cold, structured, rigid. A kingdom obsessed with hierarchy. Every architectural line feels like a rule. Every corner feels like a warning. This is the world before Hornet disrupts it. A place untouched by rebellion, unchallenged by compassion, untested by change. The Citadel style whispers a single message. You are at the beginning. A beginning made of stone. Style 2, Cradle, warmth, hidden beneath hardship. Where Citadel is ice and discipline, Cradle is warmth and possibility. Burnt gold, soft greens, gentle curvature in its frame. Cradle represents the first cracks in Farloom's philosophy, the moment when Hornet stops being a prisoner and begins becoming herself again. Unlocked through early story milestones, this theme signals the world recognizing Hornet, the idea of home taking shape, Bellheart beginning its rebirth. Hornet choosing not just to survive but to care. Cradle isn't comfort. It's the promise of comfort. A fragile promise, but a promise nonetheless. Style 3. Abyss. Truth in the dark. Not the abyss of hollowness, but a conceptual cousin. A place not of origin, but of unraveling. The Abyss menu style is drenched in black-blue gradients, stark whites, thin, violent line work. It appears when Hornet faces truths that cut back at her. This theme ties to personal revelations, major boss confrontations, echoes of old trauma. The recognition that Farloom is not only broken, it is designed to break the Abyss style doesn't comfort. It confronts. It forces the player to breathe differently, to lean forward, to acknowledge the stakes. When this theme appears, Farloom stops pretending to be a kingdom and reveals itself as a crucible. Style 4. Surface, where hope becomes visible. The surface theme is breathtaking in its subtlety. Sunrise colors, soft clouds, a palette that feels like an exhale after holding your breath for hours. This menu appears after major upward movement, literal or emotional. Moments where Hornet escapes cycles of violence, or where the player begins approaching their chosen ending. Surface represents emergence, freedom, possibility, the chance that Farloom might be saved instead of sacrificed. It's the first time the world feels open, the first time the UI looks upward instead of inward. It is hope made visible. Style 5, steel, the final judgment, cold metal, red accents, lines that feel sharp enough to cut skin. This theme unlocks only after completing the Trial of Steel or its equivalent. A mode where the story isn't just told, it's lived through tension. Steel represents mastery, resolve, the acceptance of consequence. Hornet stepping fully into the role she was forged for. It is the most intimidating and most intimate menu style, the UI equivalent of looking into a mirror and seeing not the hero you wanted to be, but the one you became. Menu styles as storytelling tools. What makes these themes brilliant is that they are not tied to a morality system, nor are they just cosmetic. Instead, they represent perspective. A player who sees the Abyss theme is not being punished. They're being told, you've reached a part of the story where the truth matters. A player who sees Surface is not being rewarded. They're being reminded, you climbed. The menus map emotional geography, chart story tension, and let the player sense what state the world is in before a single line of dialogue appears. It's elegant environmental storytelling hidden in the UI. Why Team Cherry designed it this way? Because Silksong is not just a game of getting stronger. It's a game of changing states, of rising, falling, understanding. The menu themes are not simply styles. They're reflections of Hornet's evolving relationship with Farloom, and the player's evolving relationship with the game. Citadel is the start. Surface is the ascent. Steel is the resolution. Cradle is the heart. Abyss is the truth. 5 themes, 5 philosophies, 5 versions of the world seen through Hornet's eyes. UI becomes poetry. Farloom is a kingdom of tension and ritual, but it is also a place defined by people. Strange, brilliant, exhausted, stubborn people who enrich Hornet's journey the way threads enrich fabric. And some of the most memorable early encounters unfold in places you least expect, beginning with the moment the player stumbles into the spa. The spa, a moment of peace that isn't peaceful at all. The first time Hornet enters the spa, she expects calm. Instead, she finds Krat. Krat is one of Farloom's strangest personalities. Sitting waist-deep in warm waters, he complains, reminisces, and mutters through the steam like a retired warrior trapped in a bathrobe. But beneath his comedic grumbling lies something sharp, an instinct that hasn't dulled with age. When Hornet begins the spa's boss sequence, Krat does something unforgettable. He joins the fight, not with elegance, not with grace, but with enthusiasm. Players see him leap from the water and start punching enemies with bare fists, his movements sloppy but determined, his voice cracking with effort. It's not just a gag, it's world building. The spa is not merely a place of rest. It is a crossroads of the people who survive Farloom, and Krat's presence shows that even the most ordinary citizens carry histories sharp enough to cut. Krat isn't just comic relief. He's a reminder that in Farloom, everyone fights in their own way. Chakra, the cartographer who maps danger, not geography. Deep in the tangled paths of Farloom lives Chakra, a cartographer whose job isn't to sketch the land, but to decode how the land responds to violence. Chakra's maps are works of obsession, lines where Hornet leaps, dots where enemies spawn, glyphs describing hazards that only appear in specific moods of the world. She explains, in her own charmingly cryptic way, that Falum shifts not only through space but through danger. Enemies patrol differently depending on the time since last rest, how many creatures Hornet has defeated, the biome's current stress level, Hornet's badge and tool configuration. Chakra is less a mapmaker and more a behavioral ecologist, studying the kingdom the way someone might study a nervous animal. And her work directly influences one of Silksong's most important exploration mechanics, the quill system. The quill system, red ink, purple ink, and the truth of observation. Unlike Hollow Knight's map that updates slowly and automatically, Silksong uses an active mapping philosophy. When Hornet enters a new zone, she produces a red quill. This red ink represents immediate impressions, raw, chaotic sketches created on the fly. The red maps, elevations, boundaries, major structures, but they are incomplete. Only after Hornet defeats the region's chakra-observed enemies does she earn the right to redraw the map with a purple quill, which captures deeper structure.